Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Attempted Kidnapping by Lopsided Death. Picture this. I'm around a 15 or 16-year-old girl. It's the middle of winter and around 7 p.m. I was coming down with a mild cold, and my parents weren't home. My sister was off at a school event, so I took the time to take a long bath and try and soothe whatever was in my system. About 10 minutes into my bath, I heard a frank knock at my door. This didn't strike me as too odd, as everyone in my family has a tendency to lose everything. I got out of the bath and put on a robe and was about to walk up to the door when something stopped me. I'm not sure why, but I got the urge to check in with my parents. I grabbed my phone and texted them something along the lines of, "Hey, is one of you locked out?" The knocking at the door got louder, and my dog, who was crated, was barking. My phone rang, and my dad responded with, "Nope, I'm still at your sister's school event." My dog barking made me nervous. She's not necessarily a quiet dog, but she never barks at my family or me. I decided to just tiptoe out of the bathroom and into my sister's room, which is right next to the front door. I looked through her blinds and saw a man at my door. My heart dropped. It wasn't my mom or anyone I knew. It was a man wearing all black with ragged hair, a crowbar in his hand, and what looked like a gun in his pocket. He pounded on the door this time. I could see he was using both of his hands to do it. My dog started going crazy at that point, and once she started up, I saw the man step back and beckon to a car in the front. Another guy jumped out and walked up onto my porch. I decided that was enough. I ran over to my dog's crate and let her out. She's not a large dog, but she's a loud one. She started jumping at the door, barking so much she had to take labored breaths and growled through the crack that reaches to the outside. I heard a faint, "Oh, fuck, nah," before I heard a car door slam and the crunching of gravel, a clear sign that the car had left. My dad rushed home and I frantically explained what happened. We searched our front yard and porch to check to see if they left any evidence. And the only thing that we found were dents where the man had pounded into the walls. Creepy Grandpa While Hitchhiking by Wander with Lust. First of all, this is the story of my worst hitchhiking experience. This incident was sketchy as fuck, but I still wouldn't give up my love for hitchhiking. I'm a 21-year-old. I was 20 at the time, and I'm from Finland. This happened on the 2nd of December last year in Kalamata, Greece. I'd been hitchhiking for quite a while at that point. I'd started from Budapest and had hitchhiked through 7 different countries with only positive outcomes. The story begins around 11 a.m. on a Saturday. Some hours before, I had woken in my hammock hung up behind the castle ruins, in the only place that had trees that weren't someone's olive trees. I was tired from the lack of sleep caused by the cold night and early wake-up by noises of the busy market across the street. After a quick tour of the town and some breakfast, it was time for hitchhiking. I made a sign with the words Athens and Sparta in Greek. I was standing by a road leading to a roundabout where the first exit goes towards Areopoli, the second towards Sparta, and the third towards Athens. A lot of cars drove by, but nearly all of them took the first exit. It took at least an hour for the first car to stop. It was this small, quite old, worn-out white car, and driving it was an older guy, around 60, who looked a little dirty. Greasy hair, some teeth missing, and a big nose filled with visible blackheads. He didn't really speak English, but I could understand that he was going to Sparta. I was a bit frustrated by the fact that pretty much all the cars were going towards Areopoli, so I thought this might be my only chance, and jumped in. We were trying to have a conversation, but without a shared language, it wasn't really possible. We introduced ourselves, and I tried to explain where I'm from. He smoked and offered me a cigarette too, but I refused. We drove just shy of 6 kilometers before the guy suddenly made a left turn, and we ended up in his yard. He stopped the car, got up, and signaled me to follow, so I did. I took my bags and felt a bit confused. It was a small house on the mountain surrounded by sheep and olive trees. There was a dog sleeping in the sun, but it didn't seem to be bothered by us at all. We walked to this balcony terrace that surrounded his house, and I put my bags inside of the house and joined him sitting on the balcony. He lit up another cigarette and asked if I wanted to eat something or maybe take a shower. I refused, and with the help of Google Translate, I asked why we weren't going to Sparta. He answered that I could sleep at his house and he would drive me there tomorrow. I tried to explain that I would like to get to Sparta or even Athens that day, so staying at his place wasn't really an option. I was pointing out that there's not that many cars going past his house, like one every 15 minutes or so, and only some 4 or 5 hours of daylight left, so every minute was valuable to me. He didn't really seem to understand, so I got up and walked through the door to grab my bags. I put my backpack on and picked up my other bag. I turned around to see him inside. I tried to walk out, but he stopped me and guided me to the side, locked the door, and turned to me. At that moment, I wasn't panicking or anything because I assumed that that was a form of hospitality and he was just doing it jokingly to offer me some food. I kept saying no to him, but he didn't care. Now he was standing right in front of me, and I was starting to feel very disturbed by his presence. For some reason, I kept staring at his blackhead-filled nose. The image still haunts me. He opened his mouth and raised his right hand in a loosed fist in order to show me some blowjob motion. I was still saying no to him, but he suddenly grabbed me by the crotch and I could feel this cold tingling sensation shivering through my body as my hairs stood on end. I kept saying no, and I started to raise my fist in order to hit him. We stood like that for a couple of seconds, and thank God he let go. I was still feeling the urge to hit him, but I didn't. He asked, "No sex?" And I almost shouted "no" at him in a tone that made it sound like I was questioning the question itself. He opened the door, and I was free. I walked out feeling so fucking creeped out by the experience. I walked past the dog to the road, and I saw 2 pickup trucks on the other side of it. The trucks were surrounded by a group of hunters carrying shotguns on their shoulders, and that made me instantly feel a lot safer. I kept walking by the road for a while before a car passed me by. It was quite warm, and I was in the middle of nowhere, so I emptied one of my water bottles and turned it upside down, showing it to the cars passing by so they would think that I was out of water. It worked, and the second car stopped. I got to Sparta and later that day to Athens safely, but I felt disgusting until I got to take a shower. All the kindness I had experienced while hitchhiking before this event had made me too comfortable, and I'd let my guard down. I think humans are good by nature, but probably trusting every stranger is a stretch. Stranger danger is still overrated, though. I should note that I'm quite a lean guy and not that strong, so I was lucky that the situation didn't end up worse. Though I think I could have beaten up that also very lean shepherd grandpa. As a safety measure, I carried a knife with me, but it wasn't on me at the moment of the incident. Also, the knife could have made the situation worse. Obviously, I wouldn't have stabbed him unless it was necessary. My mind was running 1,000,000 miles an hour during and after that experience, and I thought about how everything could have turned out in the worst case. I also thought about beating the guy, telling about the incident to the hunters, and calling the police, but ended up doing nothing and just walking away. Hope karma gets that guy eventually. Even after this experience, I still think hitchhiking is the best way of traveling. But let's never meet again, you sick fuck of a person. Scary experience while camping by Peaches and Mangoes. Back in 2021, my husband and I were camping in Wyoming at the Boysen Reservoir. We got really lucky and we were able to book a beachfront site directly leading to the water, but the downside of it was that it was very, very far away from the other campsites. We were essentially isolated from everyone else. At the time, though, it sounded like a dream come true. The thing about Wyoming is that it's so desolate to the point where it's pitch black and eerily dead silent once the sun is gone. We set up our camp, enjoyed our fire, but shortly after that, a random SUV with blacked-out windows came driving down our road and into our sight. They drove towards us, and my husband tried to wave to them in case they were lost and needed help. But instead, they ignored us and drove down to the beach and stayed there for about 5 minutes, then turned around and went back up the way they came. We immediately got a bad vibe, and my husband told me to throw everything in the car, and he kept shining a flashlight towards the beach, because we had a feeling they dropped someone off there to watch us. After we packed up, we got into the car and hauled ass. Lo and behold, the SUV drove back into our campsite when they saw us leaving, and they actually started chasing us. Mind you, the roads in Wyoming are bumpy and unkept when you're in the wilderness, and on top of that, there's enormous wildlife that wanders in and out of the roads. My husband said, "I have to go fast. Are you okay with that?" And I said, "Just go and get us out of here." We were easily going 80 miles an hour down these winding roads and even through a canyon. They were on our tail for about 10 minutes until we lost them after passing through the canyon. Most terrifying experience of our lives. We think about it to this day and wonder what could have happened if we didn't listen to our gut at that moment. I should say we tried to engage with these people, but these folk barreled past us without a word. That was the first red flag. The second was that our site was so isolated. Why would anyone pull up to our campsite just to sit at the beach for a few minutes and then leave? You can't drive across the sand to the other campsites because of the water. So if you were coming to our site, you were doing it for a reason. Third red flag? We were chased by them for miles after we started leaving, so it's pretty self-explanatory at that point. Suspicions confirmed. House for Rent, The Ghost is Free, by Linjaha. This incident took place back in 1982. My sister Jay told me about it just recently. Matter of fact, she told me about it last week. She thought she told me about it years ago, but never did. Instead, her 3 friends know about it. Jay and one of her other friends, I'll call her Lori, were there when it happened. It took place in East Lake, Ohio, a small community in Lake County. Jay and Lori went to visit another friend that was still a relatively newlywed. Her friend Jenny and her husband were married only a couple of years and had a 4-month-old daughter. They just moved into a new rental house, and the house was very attractive with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, an ample-sized living room, kitchen, and laundry room with an attached 2-car garage. It didn't have a basement, but it did have a fairly decent-sized fenced-in backyard. Just perfect for a young couple starting out. They signed a 2-year lease with a rent-to-own option at the end of the lease period. My sister, Jay, and Lori were invited over to their new house about 3 months after they settled in. Lori and Jay got them a nice basket of fruit, cheese, and some toys for the baby. They were somewhat excited to see their friend's new house. They got there early in the afternoon in time for coffee, donuts, and just relaxing to chat. Lori noticed that Jenny was a little subdued and not quite as bubbly as she usually was. This was out of character for Jenny, and they noticed it. Jay and Lori were hoping that Jenny and her hubby weren't having any marital troubles, but were too afraid to ask for fear of sounding nosy. However, they were concerned. Even Jenny's husband Bob seemed a little withdrawn and had difficulty holding a conversation. They'd been talking a little over an hour when Bob finally decided not to be hesitant anymore and spilled the beans about why they were acting like they were. He told Jenny that he could tell that Jay and Lori were noticing their less than jovial behavior. He said, "They're your old friends. They've known you for years. They'll believe us." Jenny took a deep breath and nodded her head in agreement, giving Bob permission to explain what was going on. Jay and Lori listened attentively to Bob, rather cautiously though, as he began telling them what was going on with the new house since they got settled in recently. The first couple of months they were far too busy unpacking, situating, and organizing everything. And all this while Bob had to go to work, mind you. I'm sure they were pretty tired after all of that stuff. Not to mention taking care of an infant. So they didn't really notice anything unusual during that time. However, after the dust settled and they began to relax in their new environment, they began to notice some perplexing and unnerving events taking place in their beautiful new home. Events that they couldn't explain rationally. Such things as objects disappearing and showing up in the most ridiculous places, or just never showing up again. The sliding door closet in the baby's nursery was always ice cold, even on the hottest of days, and there was a light in that closet that had a string you had to pull to turn it on. Frequently, that closet light was on with neither of them touching it. They would store the baby's bassinet in there when it wasn't in use, and one day Jenny went to retrieve it to bathe the baby. She unfolded it and began setting it up, and she had just put water in the little tub and was about to set the baby in it, when the entire thing fell apart. Fortunately, she was holding the baby when it collapsed. When she inspected it to determine what the cause was for the failure, she was astounded to find that all the screws, joints, braces, and bolts were removed and lying in a small pile on the floor of the closet. That was utterly inexplicable as well as frightening. Jenny took the baby with her into the living room and called Bob. He could hear the panic in her voice and advised her to go across the street to the neighbors until he could get back home in another couple hours. She was more than happy to get out of the house to go visit. Besides, the neighbors enjoyed playing with the baby. Jenny, of course, did not tell the neighbor why she came over, but the neighbors didn't mind. When Bob got home from work, Jenny took him to show him the disassembled bassinet, but it was no longer in the nursery. They found it in a heap on the floor of the kitchen. Jenny left the house. She didn't put it there, and it sure wasn't the baby. They both began to feel something almost electric in the atmosphere, making the hair on their bodies stand on end. Neither of them has any psychic capabilities, yet they both felt the same sensation coupled with an intense cold spot in the kitchen that hadn't been there previously. This was beyond their comprehension. As much as neither one wanted to admit it, this was something paranormal. They couldn't hem and haw it away anymore. And according to Jenny and her husband, the episodes were starting to escalate to the point that they were afraid to even be in the house at all. They were beginning to feel unwelcome and threatened. But by who or what? There wasn't anything that they could physically point to as the root of the problem. It was unseen, but making them extremely aware of its presence. My sister and her friend could see the sincerity as well as the unmistakable fear in the face of this couple as they reported everything that had been taking place in the house. They were truly on edge and terrified. They just simply didn't know what to do. My sister and Lori believed them completely. Bob said he was unsure about how to approach the landlord about it. Jay reminded him that the landlord never mentioned that the house or the area was haunted. Bob thought the landlord didn't know the place was haunted, and my sister couldn't buy that. She was pretty sure that the landlord was fully aware of it all along. And for one thing, the rent that Bob was paying was remarkably, shall we say, reasonable for such a beautiful home. She told him he should have smelled a rat right then and there. Jenny sheepishly told my sis and Lori that they had taken to keeping the baby with them at all times for fear of what might happen. Jenny told them that every now and then something would pull on the back of her hair to the point that it hurt, but there was never anyone or anything in her vicinity to account for it. As the typical mother protecting her young, she began carrying the baby with her everywhere in the house in one of those baby carriers with the big handle on it. Good mom. They kept the child in her crib right by their bed in their bedroom, and if the child so much as let out a peep, they would shot put out of bed with alarm. By that point in time, they were hardly getting any rest. Poor Bob still had to go to work to pay the rent, leaving Jenny and the baby home alone. That was beginning to go over like a lead balloon. Jenny said she was getting beyond scared and didn't know where to run to get away from this. When Bob heard that, he got angry. Not at Jenny, but at whatever was tormenting them. He began raising his voice and demanding that whatever it was to stop being a coward and show itself. That was the wrong thing to say, because in challenging it, he got an answer. They were all in the kitchen seated around a dinette facing the living room. The baby was sitting in its carrier on the floor next to Jenny, when suddenly, the baby's blanket was literally ripped out of the carrier and thrown at Bob. The baby began to cry and shake violently. They all saw it. Jenny was seated facing the interior of the living room and shrieked. My sister was distracted by the baby, but the other three saw a bread knife that was normally kept in the silverware drawer hovering in midair by itself in the middle of the living room. It was suspended in air for several seconds before dropping to the floor. Jenny and Bob went ballistic. That was the final straw. Jenny screamed, "You leave my baby alone. We're getting out, we're leaving. You can have this lousy house." My sister, Jay, and Lori helped them pack up their suitcases quickly. They all proceeded to tear out of the house, but not before calling Jenny's parents, who only lived 15 minutes away, to ask if they could stay with them for a while. They just told them that something traumatic was happening and they would explain further when they got home. Before exiting the house, my sister and her friend told whatever it was to stay in the house and leave them alone. They slammed the door behind them. About a week later, Bob called my sister and Lori to inform them that they were living with Jenny's parents for the time being, until they could secure another place to live. Unfortunately, the landlord of the haunted property was holding Jenny and Bob to the 2-year lease, and expecting payment even though they had to flee the place. Bob accused the landlord of renting a haunted home to them without ever disclosing that fact. The landlord told Bob he was nuts and just trying to get out of the lease. Bob became quite indignant and informed the landlord that he was going to sue for failure to disclose that the house was haunted. And furthermore, he had 2 reliable witnesses to what transpired that drove them from the dwelling. He contacted Jay and Lori for written depositions verifying what they had witnessed, and both girls were happy to oblige. My sister was a legal secretary at the time, so she typed up the depositions and got them notarized. They didn't want their friend and her husband getting cheated by a lying, money-grubbing landlord. Once Bob had the depositions in hand, he and his lawyer paid a call on the landlord. Strangely enough, the landlord released them, in writing, from the lease. Once he was confronted with a lawyer and written testimony, he didn't have a leg to stand on. Don't you just love it when less than honest people get it stuck to them? According to my sister, the couple found a nice, slightly smaller but totally unhaunted house to live in. Their daughter is grown, but she doesn't remember anything as she was just a baby during that time they lived there. Her parents don't want to tell her. They prefer to leave well enough alone. My Mom's Boyfriend by FewChain8462. I want to start off by saying I'm one of the oldest siblings in my family, and my parents got divorced a few years back. My mom is one of the strongest women I know. After their divorce, she found someone that was loving and treated us as a family right. She met him at an event, and it seemed like they were soulmates. At first I thought they were meant to be perfect for each other. He has been so supportive of her and great to my younger siblings. As one of the older siblings, I brought it on myself to do some research on the guy just to make sure there weren't any red flags. After looking into him, I found an account with a picture suspiciously looking like him. After finding this, I brought it to everyone's attention. The account was a sexual account linked to him. I couldn't believe it and brought it up to my mom just to be pushed away. A couple months went by just like normal, and we all kind of forgot. Recently, I decided to look up the username on other sites such as Reddit, and I was shocked. What I found was unsolicited pictures of my mom posted for meetups. He was a completely different person than what we knew. He was sneaking illicit pictures of my mom online to meet up with other people. Of course, when I found this out, I showed my siblings. With all this proof, we brought it up to my mom, all of us sobbing, "You have to leave him." At first she was on board and blocked him, and more came out about the person he truly is. My mom started to distance herself from him. She confronted him and he denied everything until he said he would kill himself. Soon after, she left town and he found out where she was staying and called her hotel phone all night long. In these phone calls, he was yelling, "Answer the phone, bitch, I know you're there. Why are you ignoring me?" As the phone calls were falling on deaf ears, he decided to act on it. At 6 a.m., I got a call from my sibling to check the blink cameras at my house. He decided the best way to handle the situation was to come to the house and to act crazy and scream into the cameras while playing creepy music at 1 a.m. He ended up stealing the cameras and saying he was going to throw the cameras in the river. Of course, I woke up extremely concerned and immediately thought he messed with our family dog. Thankfully, he didn't, and just took the cameras. I proceeded to call the police and got them back while Mom was out of town. The cop said my mom's boyfriend seemed off and to be a serious threat to my mom and she should get a restraining order. After this event, he called my mom and gaslighted her. He came to her and said he'd been blacking out, different personality, and couldn't remember events. Sadly, she took his side and believed him. He went on to say he didn't remember posting her without her consent, and that was his other personality. She completely believed him and wanted to help as she thought he was mentally unwell. His devious, gaslighting plan had worked. There's no way he is telling the truth. I'm scared he's going to hurt us. I don't know how to get rid of this guy. I'm terrified my mom and him will get married soon. Any suggestions from you guys out there would help. Thanks. Soon, I hope I'm saying, I hope we never meet again. Strange Encounter, almost 10 years ago, by Upper Application. On April 26, 2014, my best friend, who was 18, and me, I was 19, were driving back to his house from Bible study at church. It was between 9 and 10 p.m. About a mile and a half or so, turning onto a long country road that led to the small township he lived in, we saw a fire on the left side of the road and into a ditch. We turned around to get a better look and see what was burning. Being in the passenger seat, I was able to look down into the ditch and saw nothing burning. There was definitely a larger amount of fire than I could see through to the ground, but nothing was on fire. The ground itself appeared to be porous and folding inwards. My best friend had to pull on my shoulder to get my attention because I could not stop staring into it. A large amount of smoke started to pour out, and my friend began driving again. We eventually had to turn around to get back to his house at the other end of the road, and when we reached the end of the road where we began, I dialed 911 to let them know that there was what appeared to be a gas leak that had caught fire in the ditch. We drove past the fire again, but it had died down a bit. However, there were now little small tufts of flame on the ground. One after another, they led away from the ditch. While I was turning around and looking back over my shoulder, my friend slammed on the brakes and I heard him say, "Huh?" or "Oh." Walking out horizontally into the road from the trees on the same side of the road that the fire was on was something that does not fit any description of anything I have heard from stories before. My brain needed to itemize its descriptions as I remember noticing them. It was black, big as a sedan and on 4 legs. It had shaggy black fur from its shoulder to its head and looked emaciated from midsection to tail. It had black skin stretched around bones on everything behind the shoulders, and it had a canine-like head, eyes very forward-facing, and eyes were not reflecting light. They were large, round, black, and empty, completely devoid of light, and it blinked, and the eyeballs were pressed inwards with the lids as they shut. This thing was between 5 and 10 yards away, so I got a very good look at it through the high beams. It didn't turn to look at the car, and its head was raised up slightly as if it were looking into the car to look directly at us. I was not particularly afraid or fearful. However, when it looked directly at me, I felt intense feelings of dread and hopelessness being projected at me. My friend floored his old Ford Taurus and whipped it around the back end of the thing, and he drove 65 in a 35 all the way back to his house. As we were driving, I asked him, "What was that?" With tears running down his face, he sobbed, "I don't know. I want to go home. I just want to go home." We ran into his house and locked all the doors and windows. And when we were finally able to calm down, we did not talk to each other much for the rest of the night. Over the next few days, I would try to relay the event to my family, beginning with, "I saw something the other night." And I couldn't stop telling them everything while choking back sobs. I didn't want to tell them, but they knew I was not okay. The intense feelings this thing put on me were beginning to take its toll. Almost a decade later, and I still haven't read a single story or alleged sighting of anything that matches what I saw. Since then, I've become familiar with regional cryptids and the lore associated with them. This wasn't an apparition of some kind because it blinked. And I haven't read any accounts of apparitions blinking, only closing or opening their eyes for some desired effect. This thing was definitely physically existing. There is nothing from my state of Indiana that even comes close to fitting this description. Maybe our Black Panther or Porter Roadhounds, but those happened many decades ago, and quite a few hours away from where this happened. Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear on this channel or my podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Subscriptions always help out a ton. And of course, hit the little notification bell for every time that I upload. If you've got a moment, please leave a comment below to let me know what you think of the stories. I love reading those, and I will respond to them as quickly as I can. Follow me on social media. All the links to that are in the description below. And if you'd like to take your support of this channel even further, find my Patreon page in the description, as well as a link to my storefront at tpublic.com. Get yourself some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. Still making plans for a live campfire. I think we'll try to do live calls. We've always had a good time with that in the past, and man, it has been so long since I have done a live campfire. I'm really looking forward to it. So stay tuned for that. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.